and then after that I'll start with a little mihi and then introduce our guest speaker, and afterwards there will be an opportunity if you want to ask questions. Oh, excuse me. So in case of an emergency, should we start a fire or see one, we're going to exit out this door here and assemble under the archway further around in the gardens. If you need the toilets, gents, shorter walk to your right, women, way the heck down the end of the other corridor. And that's pretty much all I need to tell you about safety. If you're wanting to be notified about heritage talks, we have a little book where you can give us permission to record your emails and notify you about what's happening. So if you can remember when you exit, it's been a bit messy this morning because we've had the locked door and a few technological issues, but usually we like to check to see if you want it before you come in. But if you remember when you go out, then you can put your name down and we'll email you about future talks. Sorry, a bit froggy. So Melani's just going to start off with a karakia, and then I'll do my mihi and introduce Ross.
Inoi tātou, whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, kia hi ake ana te atakura, he teo, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei Māori ora.
I ngā mana, i ngā reo, i ngā hau e whā, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Ki te kai karakia, tēnā koe Melani. He mihi nui ki a koe mō tō karakia. Ki tō tātou mātua i te rangi, ko ia te timatanga me te mutunga o ngā mea katoa, nō reira e pā tēnā koe. Tēnā koutou i o tātou tini mate, haere atu rā. Ka hui tātou ki ngā tangata ora. Tēnā koutou ki a koutou, kua tai mai nei ki te awhi i o mātou. I tēnei wā, e hari koa ana hau ki te tūtaki i a koutou. Ko Maka hau, I'm the newest heritage librarian the library has. Ki te kai kōrero e tēnei ahi, tēnā koe Ross, tēnā koe Georgina, support crew, and very skilled archaeologist in our own right. He mihi nui ki a koe, mō tō kōrero e pā ana ki ngā motu o te moana nui a kiwa. Nau te raurau, nāku te raurau, ka ora te iwi. Ka nui tēnei māku, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Delighted to see you all here. I have great pleasure in introducing our guest speaker. He's been here before and gave us an excellent talk and is following on, and I would say building on the previous talk to expand a bit more on his research. Ross Ramsay has a very good pedigree, and I'm not able to expand on that too much, but he has done a lot of work on researching the connections between the Pacific and Aotearoa, and is fairly knowledgeable on this subject and is going to share with us a little more in depth about the connections that there are. Ross is a very studied person. He has published papers and also, I believe, done the hard work of actually, physically doing the dirty work in the research as well. And he is currently researching with 3 of his colleagues, which one of them is here, is that correct, Georgina? On the origins of 3 shaped scoria blocks that were carried to New Zealand by early navigators. He has MSc Honours in Science from Auckland University and a PhD from the University of New England. Has worked in industry, government and academia, so he's got a lot of strings to his bow. So we're really looking forward to your presentation, Ross, and I'd like just to open the floor up to you and let's hear your exciting story about Polynesian links and New Zealand place names.
Yes, good morning everyone, thank you for coming. I see a few faces that were here last time I was here, so that's really great to renew those associations. I'm just going to waffle for a little bit, just to start with. I'm not going to stand behind that all the time. You can hear me down the back, can't you?
Yes.
I speak very loudly. My wife tells me so. But we're going to start off, if I may. I'm going to speak to you about place names that we find in New Zealand and overseas, but in particular, one particular volcanic island known as Mehetia. Now, if you look back in archaeology over the last 100 years, Mehetia doesn't feature. It's a late rising star, if you like to say, and I think my researchers, whom I'll introduce in a moment, and I have brought Mehetia into focus as a very important staging post for early Polynesians or Polynesian people on their way to New Zealand. And that's not all of them, but probably a certain group of them who voyaged to New Zealand on these remarkable canoes. We believe they were double-hulled canoes, and they were deep-sea voyaging canoes. And we often associate these canoes with the people who were on them. But in fact, there's much more to that. Not only the people, but the animals and the plants they brought, the artifacts, and the place names. Those place names were carried on canoes 500, 600, 700 years ago. And we find them in the Eastern Pacific, and we find them here in New Zealand. And a good colleague of mine, Christoph Sand from New Caledonia, makes the important comment that often the origin of the place names is forgotten, but the name remains. And so we have these names scattered around New Zealand, and we're now looking at them, and they give us very important clues as to the origins of the people who planted those names here in New Zealand. So today I'm going to be speaking on to New Zealand place names and links to Eastern Polynesia. Now I'm grabbing or hogging the limelight because I've got three good colleagues, and I'll introduce you in a moment. Georgia, who's over here with me, Graham Collett from Dunedin, and my good wife Gail Ramsay, who's working at the moment with Heritage New Zealand. In addition, I want to make comment that there was a fifth member, Russell Beck. And I don't know whether Russell Beck resonates up here, but down in Southland it certainly does. And he's done a wonderful book with Andre Apps on Pounamu. It's a coffee table book. The photography is brilliant, and Russell did the text for that brilliant book. And he unfortunately died about 3 years ago, but he was very much the founder of the sort of research that we've been dealing with. Here we are, sorry, my colleagues, as I mentioned to you, and was a very much a part of the team. Oh, incidentally, what I'm speaking to you today is a paper we've published in the Journal of the Austronesian Society over here, which came out about 5 months ago. So, in fact, it's been published, and I'm going to be talking to you about it. And we're going to kick off because I spoke here about a year ago on these very three uninteresting lumps of rock. Am I in your way? They're really uninteresting, but in my estimation at least, is they are the most important, most significant pre-colonial artifacts that we have in New Zealand. And why? Because they were never made or occurred in New Zealand. They were carried on these canoes, from the Tahiti group. They're Ara stones or Maratai stones, and I'll come on to that in a moment, or Maori stones. They're highly significant, they're sacred, and the tradition of carrying these stones, shaped blocks, on seagoing canoes has continued in Tahiti today, but has been lost, or essentially lost, to Māori, who tended to be coastal hugging canoe people in the last 300 or 400 years. But it's the sea-going canoes that tradition has been carried on in Tahiti, and they call these stones Maratai stones. And what is exciting is we're finding these in 13th, perhaps early 14th century Maori occupation sites, and it tells us that tradition of carrying these sacred stones goes back 500 or 600 years. But we're using archaeology in New Zealand to show that this tradition that has been occurring in Tahiti wasn't just over the last 20 or 30 years. It goes back in the Eastern Pacific 500, 600, 700 years. So there they are, very uninteresting. This one here from Stewart Island has had that corner knocked off, and it's actually had a little bit of a corner there. And I put it down to delinquent young Maoris who have no regard for tradition, and they've come across this, stuck away somewhere, and they've used it as a hammer. The most beautiful one, of course, in my opinion, is the Tautuku one. It is beautifully shaped, and we now have also this one down here, King's Rock, again shaped like a brick. And they were actually Tahitian people who made these and carried them to New Zealand, found that scoria was easy to work with, and fashion. It was easy to work with. Just very quickly, a little bit of the history which I gave you last time I was here. One of the blocks is the King's Rock block, and this is the little bay in the Catlins, and you can see it was found about there and about there. But when we went back last November, we found from early records that a good part of this Maori occupation zone has been weathered, washed away by the sea. So we're actively losing some of these early sites. The second one I want to touch with you is the one at Tautuku, again in the Catlins. This was the first excavation in 1956, and you can see that they've actually unearthed a part of the leg bones of a moa. It tells us that these people were of the moa hunting period. They're early, and some people in the archaeology use the term archaic. They're very early settlers. And this is the next excavation in 1963. And you can see, if you look carefully, you can see the whitish windblown sands sitting on top of dark carbonaceous occupation material. And here's the strat column here, windblown sand, dark occupation layer from which that scoria block was retrieved, sitting on basal yellow orange sands. So that gives you just a quick outline and just a little bit of chemistry. We've analysed these scoria blocks, and they're very distinct from normal New Zealand young volcanic rocks. And if you look up here, they form up here, they're alkaline, as opposed to most of our volcanic scoria, which is down here, subalkaline. And I've plotted, for example, White Island in black, Ruapehu in that sort of grey colour there, and I've even gone out to Tonga, which is down here, and Raoul Island in the red. When we go to the isotopes, we can see very clearly that our scoria blocks are very distinctive from the typical alkaline volcanic rocks that we find in New Zealand and from the offshore islands. So let's go. We're going to start off with this lovely shot of Mehetia, looking in the it's a young volcanic cone, the sacred peak of Hikurangi, is just up there. You can just catch it. I'm going to come back to that later. And this volcanic cone was active during early Polynesian settlement of the Tairawhiti island group. And consequently, this particular island was highly sacred to these Tahitians. If you go to Tahiti today, you're told over and over again about the sacred marae of Tapu Tapu Atia on the island of Raiatea. Tapu Tapu Atia is a Johnny come lately. It's a Johnny come lately. We've dated the blocks and so forth in the 17th century. This boy was far more impressive to the early Tahitians when they arrived. It's offshore from the main island of Tahiti Nui, Tairawhiti, but when it was fire fountaining at night, it would have lit up the sky and you would have been able to see the, not the island as such, but the results of the fire fountaining from the main southern Tahitian islands. It was highly sacred to them, and because of that, the early Maori settlers or voyagers retained that in their consciousness when they headed for New Zealand. We're going to look at that shortly. So that's Mehetia Island. That's the volcanic crater, as you can see there, and there's volcanic scree shedding off into the sea here. Now, in particular, three names that I'm going to mention to you, going to hear them again and again, is first of all, the sacred cone Hikurangi, which has come through in New Zealand as Hikurangi in the North Island, and you all know Hikurangi, don't you? There are 3 or 4 Hikurangis up here, and in the South Island, it's become Hikuraki. And I didn't realise this, but Banks Peninsula, those 2 shield volcanoes that lie at the back of Christchurch, their Maori name was Hikuraki. No, I didn't realise that. Hikuraki was the name given by the early Maori settlers. And the reason why so many, I'm going to come on to this, why so many prominent hills and cones are named Hikuraki or Hikurangi is a reflection of this sacred peak you can just see there sitting up. And it juts, this whole island juts out of the water something like 440 meters. So it's very impressive, just rises out of the water. It was volcanic at the time and would have made a big impression on those early Polynesian settlers in the Tahitian area. So here's a wonderful quote from Matu Clendon. He's a Komata, and I've pinched this from one of his talks where he says, from there you can see their footprints. Our ancestors, when they go to a new place, they leave a footprint via a name. Names don't just fall out of the sky. There's a reason why these names are applied. And my good colleague here, Christoph Sand, in the long run, the importance of a place in the homeland might have been lost, but the name remains. And what we're going to see today is names that in most cases have been lost to present-day Maori, but if you look at them, you can trace them back to whence they came from. Okay, now this is a lovely diagram that Georgia did for us, just showing you the scoria blocks that we've been talking about come from here. The island of Mehetia is a little pimple there, just offshore, about 108 kilometres offshore from Tahiti Nui and Tairawhiti. Raiatea is up there. I've got the Marquesas in there, the Tuamotus, and their low atolls, and then of course Easter Island or Rapa Nui. So it's generally accepted that the first Polynesian settlers of New Zealand came from the area of the Marquesas, Society Islands, Cook Islands, and the Austral Islands, and the Austral Islands actually sit in here. our research indicates that 3 shaped scoria blocks from early archaeological sites in New Zealand probably, and we're still working on this, but probably originated from the sacred island of Mehetia. There's a lovely shot of Mehetia. Remember, the volcanic cone is just over the top there, and look at these scree slopes, or scoria scree slopes, that are coming down into the sea. Early Polynesian canoeists would have actually gone around to the other side of the island, and I'll show you a shot of that, where you can actually land. But here, you can see it's virtually impossible to land a canoe. So, Mehetia Island was volcanically active during early Polynesian arrival in the Society Islands. We think about 1,000 years ago. Mehetia Island was sacred to early Polynesians, and at least 10 stone maraes or structures have been recorded on Mehetia Island. Now this is another shot of Mehetia from the other side. Current evidence that Mehetia Island was an important hub for voyaging to New Zealand is based on the sacred nature of Mehetia Island, Tahitian oral traditions that Mehetia Island was a departure point for New Zealand for at least some Polynesians. Discovery of 3 scoria blocks in southern New Zealand traced back possibly to Mehetia. And lastly, the high number of, here's the word, cognate toponyms. Now that's a fancy word. Toponym means place name, and cognate means shared place names. So you're going to hear me speaking shortly about cognate toponyms. It sounds high power. Toponym is another word for place name. Cognate means they're shared. Lovely shot of Mehetia. This is where they would pull in their canoes, probably in there, and they would settle there. We know that this island could hold up to about 200 people. Water is a problem on the island. There's not a lot there, but it looks as though it was a very important hub, voyaging hub, from the Tahitian group out to the Tuamotus, and then on to Pitcairn, and then on to Rapa Nui or Easter Island. And I might just mention here, these are early names for this particular island, which we now call Mehetia. It appears that its first name was Tuhua. And does that resonate with anyone? Tuhua? Any comment? It's the Maori name for Mare Island. That has been transferred from this island to Mare Island, and there are about another 7 Tuhuas scattered around the country. And the other name here is Ahuahu. Does that mean anything to anyone? If you come from Kaikoui, you will know immediately. Ahuahu means upstanding in Tahitian, and it's been transferred. Another one of these cognate place names or cognate toponym that's been transferred from this island here to New Zealand. Both names no longer exist, so we've had to do a lot of digging to be able to demonstrate that these are early names for this island, Mehetia, which now still occur in New Zealand. So these 2 names have died in Tahiti, but have still continue today. There's a last one here, a Mekatu. It was also known as Mekatu. We have Makatu in the Mehetia. I'm not sure that there's a direct cognate toponym there. Makatu has an A, this has got an E, so it would require a linguistic expert, and we've just note that in passing. Okay, our cognate toponyms shared with New Zealand, and this is the work Andrew Crow's done, really good, pioneering, basic work, counting all the cognate toponyms found in the Hawaiian Islands, Society Island, Tuamotus, Rapa Nui, and the Southern Cooks. And when you add all of them up, Hawaii is far, far ahead of everyone else. Huge number of cognate toponyms, 337 recognised by Andrew Crow. He then realised, of course, but Hawaii is a pretty big area. big islands, so of course they'll have lots of place names. Little small ones, such as Rapa Nui, can't possibly have as many place names. It's just too small. So what Andrew Crowe decided to do was to take each of these groups or numbers of place names and divide them by the land area. Now, dividing by land area, you get a much better grasp as to the number or significant number of place names shared between here and New Zealand. And when you do that, poor whole Hawaii really ends up with the ambulance at Ellerslie Racecourse, as you'll see. Here we are. Hawaii, or the main island here, Maui, drops to 0.12. It barely makes a mark. The two front runners from Andrew Crowe's work is Akiaki in the Tuamotus at 5.3 and Vahitahi again in the Tuamotus at 3.4. They're the two that stand out as having the most number of place names found here in New Zealand based on land area. And these little atolls, there's not a lot to name on these little low coralline atolls. So that's pretty good for two islands in the Tuamotu group. And here we are, based on Andrew Crowe's work. Poor old Mehetia is still quite significant at 1.3. He recognised 3 cognate toponyms, and you take 3 divided by 1.5, I think it is, and you end up with a factor there of, you end up with a factor of 1.3. So even Mehetia at that level is pretty significant. Now, a wonderful aerial shot of Mehetia. Look at that, you can see the young volcanic cone there, and the remains of a much older volcanic cone that built up much of Mehetia running around there. And there are a number of peaks with names, but I've picked out the highest, Uri, as you can see there. And then down here you can see a number of place names where the early Tahitian people settled and built their maraes and stone structures. And here's a map published by Emery, an archaeologist, in 1933, showing a number of names that we've used in our study. So, cognate toponym index for just the societies. And when we adjust for the number of place names, we've found 24 on Mehetia. And when you do that overnight, Mehetia becomes a rock star. As you can see there, it jumps to 10.4, which is probably a little bit amazing. May not in reality be quite that high, but compared with the other islands in the society group, you can see that Mehetia is far, far ahead of the other islands. Does that mean something? Is it telling us something? We think it does. You'll see that the island of Raiatea, which includes the now sacred marae of Tapuatea, really struggles at 0.26. 0.26, sorry, am I in your way? Sorry, I'll stand over here. 0.26. So again, but look at Mehetia, it's a rock star. Now I've just picked out some of the cognate toponyms that we've recognised on Mehetia. First of all, the sacred peak of Hikurangi, as you can see there, which comes through in New Zealand as Hikurangi or Hikuraki, and that name was carried on early voyaging canoes to this country. I've mentioned to you Tuhua, Mare Island, Ahu. People from Kaikoui will recognise that, but there are other Ahus around the country. And I've just picked out 2 or 3 others that occur on Mehetia Island, and their equivalents over here in New Zealand. Now, I might just emphasize a bit of a warning, if I may. First of all, there's a lot of incomplete evidence that we have or don't have. Name changes due to wars, conquest, elision of time and loss of memory, so various names may change with time. And of course, we have application of names from European influence. And there's one example I'm going to take is Hikurangi, because there are a number of European applied Hikurangis that have nothing to do with the early Maori settlers. Hikurangi Trench, Hikurangi Plateau, which is offshore, were never named by the Maori. So when we look at the name Hikurangi, we have to remove all the European applications. Okay. Mehetia Island has a very high cognate toponym index of 10.4. Is this significant? One name that does stand out is the volcanic peak of Hikurangi. Now we believe that that originally came from Samoa as Siulangi or Siulagi Point. That's where it originally was transferred to the early Tahitians when they migrated east to Tahiti about 1200 years ago. On the island of Rarotonga, they have Ikurangi, as you can see here. It doesn't appear from our research to be as sacred or have such a significance that the island of Mehetia had. The Tiara Encyclopedia states that Hikurangi was transferred from Tahiti via Rarotonga. And the suggestion from Tiara Encyclopedia, this is a secondary cognate toponym transferred back from Tahiti, rightly or wrongly. Now, I'm just going to look at Hikurangi and Hikuraki. There are 34 recorded Hikurangis in the North Island by the New Zealand Geographical Board Gazetteer. Some are of European derivation. So that 34, when you take out the European ones, drops to about 30. And what's interesting, of those 17, they're hills or peaks. And in the South Island, 2 are recorded, but again, Tiara Encyclopedia actually records 4 Hikurakis, including the old name for Banks Peninsula, Hikuraki. This is perhaps the most famous Hikurangi in New Zealand. That's from the East Coast. It's a sacred peak to Ngāti Parole people, but my suspicion is that for the last 100 years or so, well, for many years, they really didn't understand or know where this sacred, they knew it came from their ancestral homeland in Hawaiki, but it's probably only the last 20 or 30 years that they've recognized it actually came from Mehetia. But my understanding is the voyaging attachments to this name probably have not been fully understood by the Ngāti Parole people. They know it's sacred, they know it comes from their ancient homeland, but this name, Hikurangi, has a very dynamic, in our way of thinking, a very dynamic application as to how it got here. So, 34 reduced to about 30, and of those 17 are high-standing peaks or hills. Let's just, I thought I'd look Moturua here in the Bay of Islands, and what's interesting, there's Hikurangi Pa shown there. We have Rangiatia or Raiatia here. There are 3 such toponyms recorded in New Zealand, and one of them is this Pa shown here. And here's the Arakaiti Trust excavation, which Georgia worked on. It was done about 2 years ago in this particular Manahawea Bay. So, from there you can see their footprints. our ancestors, when they go to a new place, they leave a footprint via a name. Names don't just fall out of the sky, and that's my good colleague Martin Clendon. And lastly, Christoph Sand, in the long run, the importance of a place name in the homeland might have been lost, but the name remains. Conclusions, if I may. Several lines of evidence indicate that Mehetia Island was an important hub for early Polynesian navigators sailing to New Zealand. Volcanic island of Mehetia held sacred by early Polynesians. Tahitian oral traditions relating Mehetia to New Zealand voyaging. Scoria blocks most likely originating from Mehetia and now found in southern New Zealand. Large numbers of cognate toponyms between Mehetia and New Zealand, including the sacred peak of Hikurangi, finds this name repeated many times through New Zealand as either Hikurangi or in the South Island, Hikuraki. Also, bear in mind Tuhua and Ahuhahu, which are names or early names for the whole island itself, and the voyaging significance of Mehetia, whilst retained by the Tahitians, seems to have been lost to present-day Maori. In other words, the Tahitians still recognise that this island was a departure point for some Polynesians coming to New Zealand, and it's been retained in Tahitian oral history, just as they've retained the practice of carrying maritime stones on deep seagoing canoes. Thank you. I think that's all, Mac. Yeah, it is.
Well, Ross, that was an awesome talk, and I'd just like to say on behalf of all of us that we have been inspired by the stories.
You're going to look up Maori dictionaries and
we're
look for
gonna
more names.
Start digging, and looking around and paying attention to things a lot more than we did before. I know for me, I was going to be a teacher, a librarian, or an archaeologist. So as close as I've got is listening to an archaeologist.
Now, you people of Whangārei have your own Hikurangi just up here. And guess why? It was named Hikurangi because it stands up, and actually the silhouette driving north is very similar to Mehetia. I often kid myself that the early Maori settlers said, oh geez, that looks like Mehetia. We'll call it Hikurangi.
So we've got some time if people have got some questions for Ross. If you'd like to ask some questions, now is a good time. And I'm just going to give you this as a gesture of appreciation.
Thank you. Do I have to drop it in a bucket of water first?
No. Right.
Thank you.
But if you've got some time for questions from the audience.
Yes, any comments, please?
I have some.
Yes, fire away.
Yeah, so my understanding of the name Ikurangi in the Rarotonga, it refers to being the tail of the sky.
Okay.
And so that translation follows through to all the Hikurangi and Whangārei, means the same thing. And so from ancient navigation, Polynesian voyaging and so forth, they were kind of like, if my memory serves me right, landmarks that were recognised whether navigating by sea or on land.
Okay.
Yeah. And the Māori stones, when the voyaging, the Tuia 250 flotilla came out, the people of the islands coming over, the Tahitians, went to various sacred sites, and they chose specific stones to bring with them. And those stones voyaged, they carried the mana, or the sacredness of the tupuna. And so that's why they're included on the waka, on the waka haurua. And the other interesting thing is that for Māori, even though they were harbour huggers, after the big voyages, Māori homes, whare, or even today's modern homes, you'll find that some Māori people choose to have a Māori stone at the entranceway.
Yes.
So it's like a kaitiaki, a guardian. So that's the reason why they were on the waka, was to imbue a vessel with the protection, or the kaitiakitanga, of the ancient ones for the voyaging, to safe journeys and arrivals.
Thank you. Yeah, with the Tuia 250, two maritime stones were delivered to Marais in the Bay of Islands. and I'm speaking on one of them at the Hamilton New Zealand Archaeological Conference that is turned up at Martu Clendon's marae. They referred to them as Maritime stones, and you're right, they carried a number out, and it's a tradition that they carried on long ocean-going canoes, and the Tahitian voyaging society have advised me they had 3 reasons why they came on these canoes. One was to preserve the people on the canoes. One was to be placed or donated at their landfall. And the third one was to remind them from whence they came.
Exactly right.
So 3 components why those maritime stones were carried out to New Zealand and deposited around New Zealand. And what is exciting is we think from the archaeology of the 13th century we've been working on, that tradition goes back in eastern Polynesia to that particular time.
That's right.
Hey, isn't that great?
Yeah. So when that voyaging flotilla came out,
Yes.
they called into Gisborne first, the Tairawhiti.
There was one from Tahiti that came.
Yes, and they left them at each place
Yes.
that they called into. And so we have one here in Whangārei. It's down at Aotearoa Cultural Centre.
Oh, look, I would really, any chance of getting a photo?
My understanding is it was gifted there, so I'm not sure where they've placed it, but we have one.
Well, I've got the one from the Raiatea marae up in the Bay of Islands, which Martu Clendon arranged to give me a photo. Hey, that's really interesting.
So you could probably go down there and talk to Wahine
Yes.
Heparaka and
Thank you.
yeah, ask him.
Any other comments?
Are all these stones lightweight? Are they all scoria? Or are there some heavyweight?
Ah, look.
as well?
You've opened up a can of worms. The ones we've found are all scoria, and they're shaped, and they're different weights. The heaviest is about 1.6 kilograms, but they go down to about 600 grams, about 0.6 per kilogram. Now, Bill Edwards from Heritage New Zealand was at the junk shop last week, up in Kerry. Junk shops, they'd get upset if I referred to them as a junk, but they second-hand shop, there we are. And there on a shelf looked for all the world like a maritime stone. It was shaped like that, beautifully shaped. It was associated with a hogback, or the preform of a hogback adze. And so I spent, I think Friday up there with Bill, trying to drill into this particular block, because I want some fresh rock. Because if we can get the fresh rock out, we can work out where it came from. The whole thing is weathered. It's iron oxides. That tells me immediately that it was fashioned not as a pounder or a grinder, but as some sort of societal, religious artifact. Now again, we're assuming it's Maori. We don't know, but it looks very like the Tautuku block in size and dimensions. So when you ask were they all lightweight scoria, well, we're not sure. We found one that could be, but it is solid. It was solid. We can tell the lava what it was an ancaramite, solid lava once, but it's now deeply weathered to iron oxides. So I'm not sure that. I'll go one step further, if I may. There are so many Hikurangis in the North Island that there have to be maritime blocks in the North Island.
That was my question.
There have to be.
The 3 you found are all in
The South Island.
What
Now,
about-
don't tell me that only early Maoris who went to the South Island carried maritime blocks. They carried them to the North Island too. And that tells me, oh gosh, I'm getting into deep water here, that the archaeologists up here have been asleep at the wheel. We're going to find more, and they may not, this comes back to your original question, they may not all be scoria.
I wondered whether weight was a criteria.
No, little things like that. A kilogram, no problem. But we know the rock types in the Tahiti group. They are scoria, solid lava, and limestone. So if they've come from the Tahiti group, they will be, these maritime stones will be solid lava, scoria, or limestone. Now in Tahiti Nui, in the centre of it, there are some coarse-grained semi or plutonic rocks that do occur. So there's a possibility that we might have some coarse-grained equivalent to trachytes occurring, but it's almost certainly they're going to be the actual lava that are found around the coast that will occur here as maritime stones. So if you're digging in your back garden, keep your eye open. They're shaped, they're beautifully shaped, and they look like bricks. Thank you. Hello. Oh, I'm going to have trouble hearing you. Can I come up? Yes, the lady up there says there's one here in the Whangārei area.
I believe it was gifted to the people when the waka came in to Hihiawa. I'm not sure if it's on display there yet, but I know it's there because that's where they build the waka.
Yeah, could I just again comment, what you're talking about links with these early scoria blocks that we're finding in the South Island. They have a common linkage, have a common purpose, have a common reason for coming into being.
Totally.
Wonderful. Okay, any last questions?
Yes.
Hello.
Hi. Thanks for your talk. You've given a number of examples.
Yes.
Yeah. I just wondered whether you could give some other
Oh
examples.
gosh. Oh look, I'd have to look up. But we found, I think about 18, something like 18, that we believe find their equivalents here in New Zealand. The most obvious one is Hikurangi. It dwarfs everything except possibly the equivalent of Tahiti. Tahiti, you will find all sorts of offshoots of Tahiti here in Māori place names. But I think Hikurangi is number 2 if you look for cognate place names. If you're really keen, I'm happy to email you our publication where we list all of them, and we also list, there it is there, we also list where they occur on Mehetia, like a bay or a hill or a reef or a cave. There's even a cave.
The journal? Yeah. This journal. Can we get it in our library? Question? Why not? I'll have to check. We have links to journals through our digital side of our collection, and I can check to make sure. If we haven't, then I'll find out with the digital journal person.
It's published in Taiwan, hence the Chinese lettering, but it deals with the essentially all matters dealing with the Austronesian people. And Austronesian means that those Polynesians, Micronesians that came down out of, we believe, Taiwan.
Sometimes we just get the front page of the journal and you have to jump through all the hoops to get into them. So I'm not sure what the story is with this one. The really last final little, as you have questions?
Oh, thank you, Mac. Love coming down. Lovely to meet the people again. And I'm sure there was some here last time. So they're getting an update of where we are at the moment.
Well, I'd say the story hasn't finished.
No, it's a lot more, because we've found a new scoria site in Southland. Oh, we're going to speak in Hamilton at the New Zealand Archaeological Association's conference in a week's time. So we now have a 4th scoria site, but it's in Southland again. So what is happening up here in Northland?
You need some help, Georgia. Is it the
Well,
chemicals?
there's too much scoria up here already.
Oh,
There's too much volcanic activity. Whereas in Southland it stands out. You can tell this is a
photos here, but I'm sure you would like me, like to show your appreciation. The next talk next month is we've got Zana Bell coming to talk. Her title is Adventures in Historical Research. So that's not one to miss. So if you'd like to be advised by email, don't forget to give your email to Melanie at the front as you go out. But thank you very much, Ross, and thanks for
Thank you for your good comments.
Yeah, thank you. I worked alongside Billy. I worked alongside Billy. It's not in the historic space, but